Kauhava is a parish well known for arts and crafts, and especially for sheath knives. Made in Kauhava has come to mean a sheath knife. There have been more good knife makers in Kauhava than anywhere else in Finland. Of course, there have been blacksmiths making good sheath knives in other Finnish parishes too. For instance, in Hyrynsalmi, Härmä, Kokemäki, Pekanpää, Rautalampi and Toijala. Some blacksmiths there have created their own individual types of knife that are well known all over the country. Knife making in smithies and workshops has been mostly handwork. A knife master made the most important parts of the knife himself, but had some of the work done by his assistants and suppliers. One of these knife masters is Kustaa Lämmi, a third-generation knifesmith from Kauhava. The edged steel used for knife making in Kauhava measures 5 times 13 millimeters. The steel is then widened little by little and at the same time made thinner at the back of the blade. Heating and hammering thinner several times produces a much better blade, especially when it has been properly tempered. The iron of Kauhava does rust, though it says otherwise in the song. A good sheath knife is not made of rust-proof steel, but of carbon steel, which suits the purpose better. As the blade is being forged, it becomes more solid, which improves the properties of the blade. The blade is a little longer than the piece of metal from which it is made. Tempering is a phase of work that affects the final quality of the blade. When the blade is red like a cranberry, it's the right temperature for tempering. If tempering is carried out too hot, the steel remains porous, even if it has already been forged solid. Tempering with soft water gives the best result. Oil doesn't temper so sharply as water. The best blade can be obtained with an old-fashioned grindstone made of clay. It doesn't burn. The knife must be ground until the edge is a little turned. When the blade is being ground, there must be enough water, or else it may get too hot and be spoiled. The blade gets the right ratio between hardness and toughness during the removal of stress. The knife master follows the color of the blade closely. It must be something between straw yellow and bluish. Then the blade will cut best. The ground and stress-removed blades are now in the hands of the assistant smith, who gives them their first polishing. The marks made by the grindstone are smoothed with a polishing wheel. The wheel is coated with emery powder. Then come the finer wheels. Wax is used to prevent the blade getting too hot. For decoration, beeswax is melted onto the surface of the blade, and figures are drawn on the wax. After the decoration has been drawn, the knife master etches the figures onto the blade using nitric acid. The pattern is etched deep into the metal, so that the pattern will remain after the final polishing. Decorating the back of the blade by etching originates from the last century. Knives and sheaths worn as part of the dress have of old been decorated with fittings. The lower fittings are made of a thin, flat piece of German silver and soldered with silver. The fittings of the knife and the sheath are usually made of the same metal. On Kauhava sheath knives, the fittings are of German silver or brass. The fittings get their exact form in the mould. They are then fixed on the shaft with liquid brimstone. The handle is made of thin birch bark, not more than 1 millimeter thick. The bark must not have too many cross lines, as these may spoil the look of the handle. When a metal figure is chased in the bark, it may break if there is a cross line in the bark. Then the handle is damaged. The Lammi family have been making sheath knives with birch bark handles for nearly 100 years. A firm handle is made by arranging the small pieces of thin bark slightly crosswise. The handle of a 10 centimeter long knife is made of 50 to 60 pieces of bark. This sort of knife handle is made in different parts of the country. The idea of knife handles made of birch bark pieces dates from Viking times, more than 1,000 years ago. The sheath knife has been known for a remarkably long time. Knives made of iron have been in use since the 400s. The knife has long been a national tool and implement. It has remained basically unchanged for centuries. There are decorated and undecorated sheath knives, big and small, to suit different purposes. The knife fittings are important because they bind the handle and give the whole knife an attractive appearance. The fittings, together with the sheath, are the first thing that attract the eye. The decoration of the top fittings represents the knife master's very best work. So it is with Kauhava knives too. One of the decorative motifs on the top fittings is a horse head. The normal size of the knife is twice the width of a man's hand. One hand width for the blade, the other for the handle. Together this makes about 20 centimeters. The handle must fit into the hand. Knife handle fittings are manufactured semi-finished by some local moulders. The knife master then finishes the head of the handle by filing it. The shape of this head dates from the 19th century. Knife handles are made of other materials too. The work knife handle is usually made of wood. Birch bark is much used for knife handles because it is light and pleasant. For as long as birch bark handles have been made, their heads have been furnished with metal decorations. The decorations must be inlaid about 4 millimeters deep so that they don't come apart. The material used in decorations is either German silver or brass, from which 4 or 5 millimeter broad strips are cut. When the blade decorations have been engraved, the blade is rubbed with a felt disc, and it is then finished. The fittings, too, get the finishing rubbing. After that, the lower fittings are engraved. Then the file marks on the bark handle are rubbed off with pumice stone. The metal figure is left just a little higher. Because the figure is a little higher, it is easy to file it up after colour varnishing without damaging the bark surface. The varnish makes the handle fine-looking and protects it from dirt and moisture. The decorative figures can be clearly seen on the varnished handle. Engraving is done freehand. The pattern is individual in the first place because the engraving tools are homemade. The decoration can even tell whose workmanship the sheath knife is. The sheath is individually made for every knife. Sheaths have been made of leather since prehistoric times. A last is put in the sheath using talcum powder to give shape to the sheath and to protect the blade. The top of the sheath is made a little broader for the fittings. The knife master and his assistant are here making the whole sheath, but other people usually make the sheaths, and the knife master merely adds the decorations. My father designed this sheath in 1878. It used to be a little narrower at the bottom because the blades were narrower at that time too.
Samoin kuin terätkin olivat paljon kapeampia kärjeltä kuin mitä ne on sitten myöhemmin ollut. Ja samoin tupen malli on sitten vähän muuttunut.
The fittings and hooks are made of German silver. They were made in this workshop.
Ne täytyy tehdä täällä.
The sheaths made in Kauhava are famous and have remained almost unchanged in form for more than a century.
Tuppi on valmis, kun on hilat kaikki kiinnitetty, jotta sitten vasta voidaan puukko painaa tuppeen ja on kokonaan valmis.
A traditional handmade Kauhava sheath knife is beautiful craftsmanship and at the same time a very useful implement. The sheath is completed when the fittings and hooks are all fastened. The knife can be put in it and the job is finished.